Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a truly harrowing and really complex case, the 2002 kidnapping of 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart.
Right.
The story is, of course, famous for its happy ending, her recovery 9 months later, but the mechanics of her captivity, how it all worked, and the failures of the initial investigation, well, they offer some profound and sometimes agonizing insights.
That's exactly right. When you really dig into the source material we have here, the central enigma isn't just that she was abducted. I mean, that's horrific in itself.
Of course.
But it's how she remained captive for so long, 9 months, and often moving through, crowded public spaces with her two captors, Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee.
Hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. She was hidden not really by concrete walls or locked basements, but by, well, a simple disguise and just the sheer audacity of her captor's deception.
So our mission today is to cut through kind of the noise of public memory, drawing strictly from the detailed sources you shared with us. We're going to try and understand the crucial sequence of events, analyze the disturbing mechanism of psychological control used by the perpetrators.
A really key part of this.
Definitely. And dissect the critical turning points of the investigation, pinpointing exactly where things went wrong, and also what finally led to her rescue.
Yeah, this is really a deep dive into that tension, between public perception and what the criminal reality actually was. It's a case that forces us, and hopefully you listening, to examine how readily people dismiss what they think they see when it just doesn't fit the established profile of a crime.
Okay, let's unpack this. Right, let's start at the beginning. Section 1, the scene of the crime and the initial investigation.
Okay.
We begin in the very early morning hours of June 5, 2002. Elizabeth was asleep in her home in the Federal Heights neighborhood of Salt Lake City. Pretty affluent area. She was sharing a bed with her 9-year-old sister, Mary Catherine.
And the perpetrator, Brian David Mitchell, he entered the home after cutting a window screen. It's chillingly simple, almost.
And the detail that often gets overlooked, I think, is how intimate and immediate that violence was. He didn't just grab her from the yard. He went into their shared bedroom.
Right into the bedroom, held a knife to Elizabeth's throat, threatened her sister, too, apparently, and forced her out of the house. Mary Catherine, as you said, the sole witness.
Mm-hmm.
And her presence of mind, to lie still and pretend to be asleep, that was vital. Absolutely vital. Had she panicked, the situation could have been far, far worse for both girls.
Absolutely. And Mary Catherine's account, when she felt safe enough to share it, became really the foundational clue for the whole investigation. But here's where the difficulty started almost immediately.
Yeah.
Her initial description, it was riddled with contradictions that kind of inadvertently misdirected the police for months.
It really did. She described the man as white, maybe 30 to 40 years old, wearing light-colored clothing, possibly a golf hat. And she noted how he was calm, soft-spoken, almost polite, even while holding a knife.
Strange detail, that politeness.
Very strange. But the reality, which we obviously know now, is that Mitchell was actually 48. He was wearing dark clothes, not light, and he fit a different profile entirely.
So right away, a mismatch.
A big mismatch. And look, this kind of discrepancy isn't totally unusual in trauma situations. The brain focuses on the threat, the emotion, the interaction, maybe not perfectly on the details like a tire.
Sure.
But for detectives relying on a traditional profile, it was a massive hurdle. They were looking for the wrong guy, essentially.
That failure to match the physical details meant they were searching for, the wrong age group, the wrong clothing style. But Mary Catherine also provided another crucial piece of information, something internal that kind of got set aside initially.
Right. She distinctly recalled that the abductor's voice sounded familiar. Yeah, she just couldn't place it, couldn't put a name or a face to that voice at the time.
And the police, according to the sources, kept that specific detail, the familiarity of the voice, a secret.
They did. Maybe, standard procedure to protect the witness, or perhaps they didn't fully credit the insight of a 9-year-old who couldn't immediately identify the person, but this familiarity, of course. Well, that was the key that eventually unlocked the whole case. It just took months for it to surface properly.
There was also a really significant delay in actually reporting the crime to the police. Mary Catherine, understandably terrified and alone after Elizabeth was taken, she hid for an estimated 2 hours?
About 2 hours, yeah. Before waking her parents in Lois Smart, just before 4 a.m.
And even then, her parents initially struggled to believe her. They thought maybe she was dreaming, confused.
Until they saw the proof. The cut window screen, that confirmed it wasn't a nightmare.
Right. But that delay, even though it's completely understandable given her age and the terror of the situation, It meant that any physical evidence trail, whatever might have been there, was already cold by the time police were officially notified.
Exactly. Time is so critical in those first few hours.
Once the community grasped what had happened, though, the response was just huge, immediate and overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely massive mobilization. We saw up to 2,000 volunteers a day, apparently. Groups like the Laura Recovery Center helped organize it. Dogs, planes, ground searches. The whole 9 yards.
But they were searching for, a frantic stranger who'd fled the area. And the reality was the captors had already moved Elizabeth just about 4 miles away into the nearby foothills, hiding close by.
And that physical search was hampered from the get-go. Police found virtually no usable forensic evidence at the scene, no clear fingerprints, no DNA they could use. A bloodhound search didn't pan out either.
So a vacuum of evidence.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And this created a void that investigators, well, they quickly tried to fill by focusing on the nearest person of interest they could find with any connection, however tenuous, to the family.
And that person became the kind of infamous red herring of the case.
Yep.
Richard Ricci.
Yep. Richard Ricci. He was a handyman who had done some work for the Smart family previously. He had an existing criminal record, history of drug abuse, things like that.
And he was arrested pretty soon after the kidnapping, but on an unrelated parole violation, right?
That's right. It gave them a reason to hold him. And the sheer volume of resources poured into investigating Ricci. It was frankly catastrophic for the timeline of finding Elizabeth.
They really focused on him.
Heavily. The sources confirm police zeroed in on him, even though he vehemently denied any involvement in the abduction. They even charged him with theft related to some tools or items missing from work he'd done at the Smart home, basically to keep him locked down while they pressured him.
And this went on for months.
It lasted until August 2002. That's June, July, August. 3 critical months. And then Ricci tragically died of a brain hemorrhage while still in jail.
Wow.
His death basically forced the police to admit they were back at square one. They'd wasted those crucial early summer months pursuing entirely the wrong man.
That must have been just devastating for the family, for the investigation.
Yeah.
Realizing the real perpetrator was still out there.
Absolutely. And meanwhile, you had the Smart family themselves taking really proactive steps. They created a website. They provided home videos to the media. They were leveraging every tool they could to keep Elizabeth's name and face front-page news.
A strategy that ultimately proved much more fruitful than the initial police work, it seems.
Sadly, yes. Their public advocacy became incredibly important later on.
Okay, so if the Ricci focus was a major failure point in the investigation, let's talk about the captors themselves. Their bizarre ideology seems to be the real engine of the crime. Section 2. The captors. Ideology, history, and control.
Right. To understand the psychological environment Elizabeth was forced into, you absolutely have to look at the deeply troubled backgrounds of Brian Mitchell and Wanda Barzee.
Mitchell, born in 1953. His predatory behavior started incredibly early. The sources mention he exposed himself to a child when he was just 16, sent to juvenile hall for that.
Yeah, that's a huge red flag right there at a young age.
Definitely. And it was followed by a history of substance abuse, volatility, his second wife alleged abuse, and, most disturbingly, a daughter from that marriage later claimed Mitchell sexually abused her for 4 years.
So you see this clear pattern. Escalating sexual deviance, a need for control that predated Elizabeth's abduction by decades. This wasn't something that just came out of the blue.
Not at all. And Wanda Barzee's history, it reveals a similar pattern, maybe of abuse that was internalized and then externalized onto others.
It seems that way. The story shared by one of her own daughters is just chilling. She referred to Barzee as a monster, alleged that Barzee once, apparently, forced her to eat her own pet rabbit for dinner as a punishment. It paints this picture of extreme psychological cruelty and manipulation long before she ever met Mitchell. So you have these two individuals, both deeply fractured, both abusive.
And they found a shared framework for their pathologies.
Exactly. And that framework was this pseudo-religious belief system they constructed together. Mitchell started claiming he was Emmanuel David Isaiah, a prophet of God, the self-proclaimed Davidic servant.
And Barzee took on a name, too.
She did. She adopted the name Hepzibah Alada Isaiah. And look, this wasn't just eccentric behavior like some quirky religious belief. This was the mechanism of complete control over Elizabeth.
It's important to clarify, too, for listeners, they were actually excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the main LDS church.
Yes, good point. in absentia in June 2002, right after the kidnapping. So their bizarre doctrine was very much their own twisted appropriation of religious language, designed basically to give their horrific crimes a kind of divine justification in their own minds, and crucially in Elizabeth's mind.
Mitchell really played the part visually too, didn't he? Dressing in white robes, growing a beard to look like, popular depictions of Jesus.
He absolutely did, and his stated goal, this grand delusion he presented, he claimed Elizabeth was just the first of many virgin brides he would kidnap. They were supposed to accompany him as he prepared to battle the Antichrist in 7 years' time.
It sounds like a fantasy structure, but it was terrifyingly real for Elizabeth. And it served as the perfect tool for what experts call coercive control.
Yes, and let's just define that for you listening. Coercive control isn't just about physical violence, though that was certainly present here. It's a pattern of behavior threats, intimidation, degradation, isolation that seeks to systematically strip away the victim's autonomy and freedom. It's continuous psychological conditioning.
And in Elizabeth's case, Mitchell used his claim of divine authority as the ultimate justification. God wants this, so you must submit.
Precisely. Total submission was demanded. And the abuse began almost immediately after the abduction. Mitchell forced Elizabeth to walk, 4 miles?
4 miles, yeah. To a remote camp up in the foothills just outside Salt Lake City. Wanda Barzee was already there, waiting for them.
And Barzee immediately participated in stripping away Elizabeth's identity. The sources describe how Barzee washed Elizabeth's feet, forced her into a sort of robe-like garment, reportedly threatening to have Mitchell rip her pajamas off if she refused.
A forced ritual.
Absolutely. A perverse marriage ceremony performed by Mitchell right after that. And then he immediately and repeatedly raped her. The sexual violence was constant from the beginning.
The whole system was designed just to break her down, physically and mentally. The physical confinement sounds horrific, shackled to a tree with a heavy metal cable around her leg.
Yes, for long periods. And sometimes they forced her into a shallow hole dug in the ground, covered with boards, just to keep her hidden if they thought someone might come near the camp.
And the psychological warfare was just relentless, you mentioned.
Yeah. Non-stop. Mitchell twisted scripture, twisted religious belief, constantly telling her she was blessed, she should be thankful for being chosen by God through him. He used starvation tactics, fed her garbage sometimes, forced her to ingest drugs and alcohol.
Why the drugs and alcohol?
To lower her resistance,
Yeah.
to cloud her thinking, make her more pliable, less able to even contemplate escape. It's systematic degradation, designed to make her see no alternative outside of accepting this horrifying new reality they'd created for her.
And part of that reality was taking a new identity. She was forced to adopt a new name.
Right. She apparently chose Esther, a figure from the Old Testament known for saving her people. Mitchell also apparently called her Sher-Jashub, another biblical name. But the crucial role here, we really need to stress, belongs to Barzee as well.
Elizabeth herself said that later.
She did. She referred to Barzee as the most evil woman she had ever met. She stressed that Barzee wasn't just some passive bystander dragged along by Mitchell. No, Barzee was an active participant, an enabler, a facilitator of the abuse. She reinforced Mitchell's claims, helped maintain the physical confinement, participated in the rituals.
Two perpetrators working together, using this shared delusion as their weapon.
Exactly. It made the control system that much stronger, that much harder to break free from.
Okay, this brings us to maybe the most perplexing aspect of the entire case. How did a high-profile missing child, with her face everywhere, remain hidden for 9 months, often right there in the Salt Lake City area or nearby? Section 3. Hiding in plain sight and the near miss.
It really is baffling when you first hear it. The answer, it seems, lies in their brazen reliance on disguise and, frankly, the public's willingness to just look away from the unusual or the uncomfortable.
So the disguises were key.
Absolutely central. Elizabeth wore full-length robes, a headscarf, and critically, a face veil whenever she was taken out in public. This obscured her age, her features, her identity, and perhaps most importantly, any sign of distress she might have shown.
And Mitchell and Barzee dressed similarly.
Yes, also in robes. They'd go into downtown Salt Lake City, panhandling, preaching their strange gospel on the streets. They effectively just blended into the landscape of eccentrics you might find in any city.
Yeah.
People saw robes and veils and just thought, fringe religion.
And she was with them constantly.
Yeah.
In public places.
All the time. The sources confirmed they took her to grocery stores, to restaurants. There were even photographs taken of them at some kind of outdoor party or gathering in the fall of 2002 with Elizabeth right there, veiled.
They were banking on the idea that if people saw a teenager dressed like that, clearly with adults who seemed to be her family, they just assumed she was there voluntarily.
Exactly. Assume she's part of this strange sect, maybe feel a bit uncomfortable, and just look away, avoid confrontation.
And this strategy, this hiding in plain sight, created what has to be the single most agonizing failure point of the entire investigation.
Oh, the library confrontation. It's hard to even talk about. This was in August 2002, only about 2 months after she was abducted.
This is still relatively early in the captivity.
Right. Mitchell, Barzee, and Elizabeth were inside the main Salt Lake City public library. They were apparently using the library computers, maybe researching relocation options, thinking about going east, perhaps Boston or New York City.
And someone noticed them.
Yes. A library patron saw them. It wasn't just the robes that caught their eye, it was the whole group, the dynamic. And specifically, this patron saw Elizabeth's eyes, visible through the veil. Something about her eyes.
What was it?
The patron later said something just felt wrong, triggered an instinct. Maybe fear, maybe sadness, it's not totally clear, but enough for that person to call the police, which was the right thing to do.
Absolutely. So the police were called.
A detective responded, came to the library, found the group, and confronted them. This is the moment, the absolute crucial moment where rescue seemed possible.
But the psychological deception worked. It worked on law enforcement.
Perfectly. Mitchell stepped right in, calm, authoritative, playing his role. He claimed Elizabeth was his daughter. He even gave her a fake name on the spot, Augustine Marshall. And he insisted, very firmly, that their strict religious beliefs prohibited the women Barzee and Elizabeth from speaking to men outside the family or from removing their veils in public.
And the detective accepted this.
He did. This really raises profound questions, doesn't it? Why was he so easily deterred? Was it a lack of specific training for this kind of situation? Was he overly concerned about, appearing culturally insensitive or violating their religious freedom?
What did the detective say later?
His name was apparently withheld in some reports, but he later testified, essentially, that he genuinely believed he was dealing with just an unusual, albeit strict, religious family. He didn't want to overstep, didn't want to force the issue of removing the veil or making the girls speak if their religion forbade it.
So he chose perceived cultural sensitivity over aggressively pursuing a potential kidnapping victim who matched, at least in age range, a high-profile missing person.
That seems to be what happened. He accepted Mitchell's explanation and he walked away.
Unbelievable. And you have to put yourself in Elizabeth's position then.
Exactly. Imagine the internal torment. The sources, including her own accounts later, recount this vividly. She was apparently gripping Wanda Barzee's legs under the table, physically unable to speak out, paralyzed by Mitchell's constant threats against her and her family if she ever broke character, if she ever revealed who she was.
She talked about that moment later.
She did. She recalled thinking, feeling, I felt like hope was walking out the door. She felt angry at herself for not saying anything, for not taking that chance, even though the fear was overwhelming. So close. And she said, I felt terrible that the detective hadn't pushed harder. He just walked away.
That failure just perfectly encapsulates the total paralyzing power of that coercive control. She was physically right there, next to a police officer, a symbol of rescue.
But psychologically, she was a million miles away, trapped. The psychological bonds the fear Mitchell had instilled were stronger in that moment than the presence of a potential rescuer. It shows how trauma can silence a victim even when help seems right there.
Just devastating. And after that near miss, they continued to evade capture. They actually left Utah for a while.
They did. By September 2002, they had moved out of state down to San Diego County in California. They lived rough in various outdoor encampments, including apparently along a dry creek bed in a place called Lakeside.
And even down in California, they had another near miss with the law.
Another one. In February 2003, so now we're, 8 months into it, Mitchell was arrested in El Cajon near San Diego. He'd broken into a church, apparently looking for food or shelter.
So he was arrested.
Yeah.
In police custody.
Yes. Spent several days in jail. And yet, nobody connected this transient man arrested for a break-in to the nationwide search for Elizabeth Smart, whose face was still on the news.
How is that possible? Why wasn't he flagged?
Well, you have to remember the initial investigation in Utah had been so completely derailed by the focus on Richard Ricci.
Ah, right.
And Mary Catherine's correct identification of the voice belonging to Emmanuel, that clue hadn't really been fully acted upon or publicized effectively yet. Crucially, there wasn't a clear, current, widely circulated photograph of Brian Mitchell identified as the prime suspect in Emmanuel.
So, to the California police, he was just some guy.
Exactly. Just a transient arrested for petty crime. No flags went up connecting him to the high-profile Utah kidnapping. So after a few days, he was processed and allowed to walk free again. Back to Elizabeth and Barzee.
The system failed her again. Twice, really. Once in the library when she was right there, and again when her captor was literally in police custody. All because the right information wasn't connected at the right time.
Precisely. The lack of that clear, modern photograph of Mitchell, identified as the suspect Emmanuel, despite the Smart family pushing for months to identify this handyman, it allowed him to slip through the cracks.
Which brings us to Section 4, the discovery and aftermath. The breakthrough, when it finally came, wasn't from a massive police raid or some DNA hit. It came from where the first clue originated.
From the youngest witness.
What?
From Mary Catherine, months after her initial feeling that the voice was familiar.
So what happened?
4 months after the abduction, this would be around October 2002, Mary Catherine had the breakthrough. That nagging feeling about the voice suddenly clicked. It belonged to the family's former handyman, the guy they only knew by his weird religious alias, Emmanuel.
She remembered him specifically.
She did. The voice connected to the face, the memory of him working there briefly. The Smart family immediately alerted the police with this specific identification. The kidnapper was Emmanuel.
And the police reaction this time, were they receptive?
Apparently, there was still some skepticism initially. Remember, they had spent months chasing Ricci. And now, 4 months later, the 9-year-old sister suddenly identifies this handyman who had only worked for the family briefly, like for a day or so, 7 months before the kidnapping, fixing the roof, raking leaves.
So it seemed like maybe a long shot to them.
Perhaps. But the Smart family was convinced. They didn't let it go. They worked with a sketch artist using their combined memories of what Emmanuel looked like from that brief time he worked for them.
And they released that sketch.
Yes. Finally, in February 2003, this sketch, which was of course a sketch of Brian Mitchell, was released widely to the media. It appeared on national television shows like Larry King Live, America's Most Wanted. Suddenly, his face was everywhere, linked to the name Emmanuel and the Smart kidnapping.
And that national broadcast was the real turning point.
That was it. Mitchell's own family members, his sister specifically, I believe, saw the sketch on TV. They recognized him immediately, despite the Emmanuel persona. And, crucially, they contacted the police and provided recent actual photographs of Brian Mitchell.
Finally, a real face to the name confirmed.
Exactly. This finally gave investigators a solid confirmed identity and current photos for their prime suspect. The hunt instantly became much more focused.
And it didn't take long after that.
Just about a month later, March 12, 2003, Mitchell, Barzee, and Elizabeth were spotted walking down a street in Sandy, Utah, which is a suburb just south of Salt Lake City.
Back in Utah. And Elizabeth was still disguised.
Heavily disguised, wearing reportedly a gray wig, sunglasses, multiple layers of clothing, including the veil, and even a T-shirt wrapped around her head, trying to obscure her appearance completely.
But this time, the disguise wasn't enough.
Not this time. Because people weren't just looking for a missing girl, they were looking for him. 2 separate couples, driving along separately, recognized Brian Mitchell from the photos and sketches that were now all over the news.
And they called 911.
Both couples called 911 immediately. Sandy Police Department officers were dispatched right away, and this time, unlike the library incident, they knew exactly who they were looking for. They had the photos, the name, the context.
So the police approached them?
Carefully, yes. Officers, including a Sergeant Victor Quezada, whose name often comes up in reports, approached the trio. And Elizabeth, still fully operating under Mitchell's psychological regime, initially gave the fake name again. She said her name was Augustine Marshall.
Still maintaining the cover story.
Even with police surrounding her. But then came the definitive moment. Sergeant Quezada looked directly at her and asked the question, "Are you Elizabeth Smart?"
And her response?
Yeah.
It's chilling.
It really is, because it shows just how deeply ingrained Mitchell's religious manipulation still was, even in that moment of rescue. She couldn't quite bring herself to say a simple yes, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of conditioning. But she also couldn't deny the truth. So she used the strange, biblical-sounding vernacular Mitchell had forced on her for 9 months. She replied, "Thou sayest."
Like Jesus' response to Pilate.
Exactly. It's a confirmation, but filtered through his twisted reality. With those 2 words, though, it was undeniable. The 9-month ordeal was officially over.
Elizabeth Smart was rescued. Mitchell and Barzee were arrested on the spot. But the psychological impact, even in those first moments of freedom, it's fascinating and disturbing.
It really is. While she was being transported to the police station, apparently she started to cry. But her first question wasn't about her parents or what would happen to her. She asked the officers, what's going to happen to them, meaning Mitchell and Barzee. Are they going to be okay?
Wow. Concern for her captors.
Right. That quote is profoundly disturbing. It speaks volumes about the complete immersion she experienced in Mitchell's world, the psychological reprogramming. Now, the public immediately jumped to conclusions about Stockholm Syndrome.
That complex psychological response where a captive develops a bond or sympathy with their captor.
Exactly. But Elizabeth Smart herself has later forcefully denied having Stockholm Syndrome, particularly in her book and a 2017 film about her experience. She suggested her concern wasn't about affection at all. It was more likely rooted in the deeply ingrained fear of Mitchell's threatened retaliation against her family if she ever disobeyed or if he was caught, or maybe just a programmed survival response after 9 months of absolute control.
Regardless of the specific clinical label, the fact that her immediate instinct was concern for her abusers just underscores the extreme level of that coercive control she endured.
Absolutely. But thankfully, she was quickly reunited with her family, and they immediately went to work trying to normalize her life, help her reintegrate. They celebrated the 15th birthday she had missed while captive.
And the day after her return, she shared that really powerful message with everyone. The poster board.
Yeah, that simple poster board reading, I am the luckiest girl in the world. Just an incredible testament to her resilience, even then.
Her case also had an immediate, tangible impact on public policy, didn't it?
It did. Within just 1 month of her recovery, the state of Utah officially superseded its existing child abduction alert system, which was called the Rachel Alert, named after another victim from 1982, Rachel Runyon. They adopted the nationwide Amber Alert system.
And the visibility of Elizabeth's case helped push that through.
Absolutely. Her ordeal, being so high profile, provided the necessary political momentum and public demand to unify and expand the missing child alert mechanism across state lines, making it much more effective.
And Elizabeth herself, she didn't retreat. She became an advocate.
A powerful advocate, she leveraged her own horrific story to fight for other missing persons and particularly for victims of sexual assault. She's used her voice consistently to push for legislative changes for better support systems for survivors. Really quite remarkable.
The recovery was, relatively speaking, swift when she was found. But the legal battle that followed was anything but. It got drawn out and intensely focused on one primary, very complex question. Section 5, legal battles and the question of competency.
Yeah, the legal saga dragged on for nearly a decade after her rescue, and it really all boiled down to this central conflict. Was Brian David Mitchell genuinely delusional, suffering from a severe mental illness that made him believe he was a prophet? Or was he a cunning, calculated manipulator faking or exaggerating symptoms to avoid prison?
Delusion versus manipulation. And this question was crucial for determining his competency to stand trial, right?
Exactly. His entire defense strategy hinged on his claim of being this religious prophet. The argument was that this fixed delusion rendered him incapable of rationally understanding the charges against him or assisting his own lawyers in his defense. If he was incompetent, he couldn't be tried in the same way.
And the process to determine this took years.
Years. Spanning roughly from 2004 to 2010. And Mitchell certainly played the part for the court during this time. He frequently exhibited incredibly erratic behavior in hearings, screaming at the judge, telling him to forsake those robes and kneel in the dust, often bursting into loud, unauthorized religious hymns during proceedings. Disruptive, bizarre behavior.
Was it real or an act? That was the question.
That was the million-dollar question. During this period, the defense psychologist, a Dr. Stephen Golding, conducted evaluations and concluded that Mitchell's extreme religious beliefs weren't just zealotry, they were genuinely delusional, part of severe mental illness. Based on this, Mitchell was repeatedly declared unfit to stand trial in Utah State Court between 2005 and 2008. Massive delays.
But then the case moved to federal court.
Right. In 2008, federal prosecutors took over, indicting him on kidnapping and unlawful transportation charges. And in the federal system, the prosecution brought in their own experts who offered a completely different interpretation of Mitchell's behavior and his claims.
And the key witness for the prosecution was
Dr. Michael Wellner, a forensic psychiatrist known for very thorough evaluations. He reportedly reviewed over 210 different sources of information, police reports, journals, recordings, and conducted 57 interviews related to the case. He presented a powerful counterargument.
Which was?
Wellner argued that Mitchell was not mentally incompetent. He was, in fact, highly manipulative and consciously using the facade of religious delusion specifically to evade justice.
So faking it.
Essentially, yes.
Well-
Wellner provided a set of diagnoses that painted a very different picture. He labeled Mitchell with non-exclusive pedophilia, which fit the nature of the crime against Elizabeth. He also diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, suggesting a long-standing pattern of disregarding others, grandiosity, and manipulation.
But the crucial diagnosis for the legal outcome was malingering, wasn't it?
That was the key. Malingering. And it's critical for you listening to understand what that means in a legal context. Malingering is the conscious, deliberate faking or exaggeration of physical or psychological symptoms, usually to avoid legal consequences or gain some other benefit.
So Wellner was saying Mitchell's outbursts, the singing, the profit claims, it was all a performance.
A performance designed specifically to convince the court, the doctors, everyone that he was just this harmless, crazy prophet rather than the calculated, competent, predatory criminal Wellner believed him to be.
So the prosecution's argument was basically, Mitchell is smart enough to understand the legal system and smart enough to try and exploit its protections for the genuinely mentally ill.
Precisely that. Wellner pointed to all the evidence of Mitchell demonstrating planning, secrecy, and goal-directed behavior. Things like traveling across state lines, enforcing those sophisticated disguises on Elizabeth, successfully deceiving the detective at the library.
Actions that suggest calculation, not random delusion.
Exactly. They argued these actions were inconsistent with someone whose mind was completely lost in delusion. Now, the defense experts didn't necessarily dispute the personality disorder diagnoses, but they maintained that a co-occurring fixed delusional disorder was present and made him mentally ill during the crime. But ultimately, the federal court found the evidence of calculated manipulative behavior more convincing. Mitchell was finally ruled competent to stand trial in March 2010.
And a pivotal moment in reaching that conclusion, or at least in shaping the perception of Mitchell, came during a competency hearing in 2009. Elizabeth Smart herself testified.
Yes. Her testimony was incredibly powerful. It cut right through all the technical psychiatric debate about delusion versus malingering. She presented the victim's reality of the man.
How did she describe him?
She directly challenged that image he tried to project of the mad prophet. She described Mitchell not as spiritual or guided by God, but as smart, articulate, evil, wicked, manipulative, sneaky, slimy, selfish, greedy, not spiritual, not religious, not close to God.
Wow. That's a powerful condemnation.
Incredibly powerful. And coming from her, the person who endured his control for 9 months, it was instrumental in cementing the court's view of him as a manipulator, not just a fanatic lost in his own world.
So, with him declared competent, the trial proceeded.
Yes. Mitchell was convicted in December 2010 on the federal charges, and in 2011 he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, in his case, was served.
But the legal path for Wanda Barzee, his accomplice, was a bit different.
It was. Barzee also faced competency evaluations initially, but she eventually reached a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to federal charges of kidnapping and unlawful transportation of a minor. She received a sentence of 15 years.
15 years. That seems less than life for participating in the same crime.
It does, and the controversy grew because, due to various factors, including previously uncredited time she'd served while the federal case was pending, and all the massive delays caused by Mitchell's protracted competency battles, she was granted a very controversial early release from prison in September 2018.
How long had she actually served?
Only about 9 years of that 15-year sentence. Elizabeth Smart publicly and very vehemently protested this decision, arguing it wasn't justice and posed a danger to the community.
And connecting this back to the bigger picture of public safety, those concerns were unfortunately underlined later.
Tragically, yes. The source material confirms that just recently, in May of 2025, Wanda Barzee was arrested again. She violated Utah state laws that restrict registered sex offenders like her from being present in public parks where children gather.
So, still posing a risk, requiring ongoing oversight years after her release.
It demonstrates the ongoing nature of managing risk with such offenders long after the initial sentence is served. Her story didn't end with her release.
All right, let's pull back and reflect on what we've covered. Final reflections on this deep dive.
Yeah, reviewing this whole case, drawing on the detailed sources you provided, the insights really highlight the extraordinary and disturbing circumstances that allowed this captivity to last so long. I think 3 critical observations really stand out.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, the crucial importance, eventually, of the young witness's memory. Mary Catherine's delayed, yes, but ultimately accurate identification of the abductor's familiar voice as belonging to the known handyman, Emmanuel. That was the singular piece of intelligence that finally focused the investigation correctly. It cut through the red herrings like Ritchie.
So never discount the witness, even if it takes time for the memory to surface.
Absolutely. Second, the terrifying effectiveness of that manufactured religious delusion as a tool for coercive control. Mitchell and Barzee successfully built and enforced this complete narrative of divine authority. It justified everything: starvation, shackling, rape, forced identity change. It rendered Elizabeth compliant and terrified, even when that potential escape opportunity, like the library, presented itself.
The power of psychological chains.
Exactly. And third, the just shocking reality of hiding a victim in plain sight. For 9 months, both the public and initially law enforcement were looking for the expected scenario. A victim locked away somewhere, or maybe a frantic runaway trying to get home.
But the reality was different.
Completely different. The simple religious disguise, the robes, the veil, coupled with Mitchell's confident, authoritative demeanor, allowed them to operate openly. They banked on the assumption that people would see something odd, feel uncomfortable, and just look away. Assume it was just an eccentric religious group, not a kidnapping in progress.
The entire investigative process seems to have been fatally hampered, at least early on, by that tension. The tension between the expected profile, the search for an unknown stranger, and the actual reality. A known figure operating under this bizarre but incredibly effective veneer of religious disguise.
Perfectly put.
Which brings us back one last time to that really chilling moment. The library confrontation in August 2002. Elizabeth Smart, mere feet away from a police detective, feet away from potential rescue, yet entirely paralyzed by fear and that deep psychological control.
And we really have to ask ourselves, and ask you listening, what does this incident truly reveal? It reveals something profound about the limitations of law enforcement, maybe even the limitations of public vigilance, when faced with radical, unconventional deception that doesn't fit the mold.
The detective was worried about cultural sensitivity.
Right. Worried about offending a seemingly religious family rather than prioritizing the possibility of a hidden crime. It really leaves us questioning how many other critical clues in all sorts of situations might be missed or discounted every single day simply because they don't fit the expected traditional profile of a crime or a victim.
The Smart case is just such a powerful illustration that sometimes the greatest obstacle to solving a crime isn't the lack of evidence, but maybe the perpetrator's willingness to defy all expectations, to hide their victim in the most visible places imaginable.
Under the easiest to miss disguise, a shared delusion accepted or ignored by those around them.
And maybe that willingness to defy expectation and our tendency to sometimes overlook the unexpected, maybe that's something for you, the listener, to consider as you encounter information and events in your own life. When something doesn't quite look like what you think it should, are you willing to question it, to push past that surface appearance?
It's a challenging thought. How much do we filter out because it doesn't fit our preconceived notions?
An incredibly sobering and important thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Elizabeth Smart kidnapping.